Being a student at school, something that most people watching this video have probably experienced. I mean, in most situations you are kind of forced to be in one until you are 18, so it's not like you have a lot of choice there. But there is an interesting thing: humans love learning, especially at a young age. So why do you hate institutions whose entire job it is to teach us? I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive, to be honest. So I thought about it a little bit, searched online, made a few notes, and now I welcome you to this caffeine induced rant. School starts way too early. I mean, 8 in the morning is a pretty reasonable time for most adults, but for students who are more often than not teenagers, it's way too early. And why is that, you might ask? Well, you see, teenagers and young adults have a different sleep cycle compared to older and younger people. So waking up at 7 in the morning, for example, might not be that hard for a 35 or a 4-year-old, but to a 17-year-old it might be extremely hard. So, can't teens just go to bed earlier? I mean, we can, but we will be just lying in bed for a couple of hours without falling asleep anyway. And because of that, sleep deprivation that occurs from it is extremely damaging to the student. Depression, being overweight, different substance addictions, and decreased inability to learn are just the main symptoms. But it's not done maliciously, at least I don't think so. It's simply that older people don't understand and don't remember the fact that teenagers have a different sleep cycle. Now, there are places where students start later. That is true, but the fact that it's only some is kind of problematic. I myself usually start at 8, but I know some people who start at 7, so improvement is needed a lot in this area. Another thing is that school is simply way too long, like between 30 to 40 hours a week. And that doesn't include studying at home and doing homework, but I will expand on that later. There is also how long lessons are in the first place. In Poland, where I live, they are 45 minutes long, which is not bad because people can pay attention for 28 to 40 minutes. But that is interest and task dependent. And the task dependent part is very important because there is only so much time you can focus on learning stuff. So in practice, only 25, maybe 30 minutes are useful. And how do I know that? Experience. Sometimes there are days where lessons are shortened to 35 or 30 minutes. And they are great. I can actually focus during the whole lesson and not just the part of it. And as a byproduct, the lesson doesn't drag on as much. Like normally I tend to look at my phone to check the time 10 minutes before the end, so try to guess why 30 minutes is pretty good time for a lesson. So, what's the fix here, you might ask? Well, start school later and decrease lesson length. It's the easiest and most doable thing on the list. In my own personal experience, I find that starting lessons at 9 usually helps a lot. And I mean a lot. And decreasing lesson length will help with two problems: the amount of time you spend at school and lessons dragging on. There are only benefits to that, and will also give us more frequent breaks to regain focus. For example, let's say we need to have 90 minutes of math. In the normal system, that gives us one 5-minute break in between them. But in the new one, it gives us 2, which I think is way better when it comes to actually paying attention. However, there is a thing that makes it basically impossible, and it is there's genuinely a metric sheet of material that a student has to learn in only one subject, so if you spread that across multiple ones, you just have a recipe for a disaster. And I am not really pulling out of my ass here. This is not a student-only complaint. I see teachers complaining about it all the time. To put it simply, the amount of stuff that teachers have to teach us compared to the amount of time is quite astounding. Going over this sized book over 6 lessons is not that bad, even if the finals expect you to know everything that happens in it. But it's still doable if you read it whole. Sorry, what's that? Oh yeah, other 9 billion subjects that require at least similar levels of attention given to them. Being in a school is a balancing act. You have to focus what you are good at to write advanced level finals in it. Don't worry, it's a Polish thing. But you also know other subjects rather well to pass and also write regular finals. But if all of the studying was done at school and everything, no problem, alright, we study everything and go home. But that's not the case. The reason why time management is so hard for students is because of I often hear that we should study 15 minutes a day for every subject. So with, let's say, 8 subjects, it's 2 hours a day. It's not bad, but this is on top of these 30 to 40 hours that we spent in school. And also skips the fact that these 15 minutes can easily turn into 2 hours for just one subject. So what can be done about this? Well, it will be definitely much harder to change compared to school times. But whoever is planning to start curriculum should probably remove some of the useless parts. And I am not talking about Pythagoras theorem, for example. It's useful in about any engineering job. Most of the stuff is not useless. But the amount of school books and information about some chemical reactions is way too much. Like, I believe some of the stuff should be reserved to university, because at that point we kind of know what we are doing. I mean, not really, but you know what I mean. My favorite thing, grades. On the surface, they are pretty useful. They give you and the teacher an information about how well you understand the subject, while also motivating you to be better due to the competitive nature of humans. So what is the problem? The implementation. It makes people stress way too much. So to get good grades you must understand the subjects. Okay, fair enough. But what if you don't? Often you can't ask the teachers because they will just say that you should already know this or that we don't have time to explain it again. So now you have to study at home without even knowing where to start. So you force yourself through and fail while getting a bad grade. So you feel bad about yourself and you think that you are bad in this subject. This suggestion makes it harder for you to understand, because if you are bad at this you definitely won't understand the new thing either, and so on and on. Until you just stop caring about the grades and barely pass the subject while also hating it. So yeah, you don't want to have bad grades, because that is the internal pressure. There is also the external one. When it comes to grades, the external pressure I think is way worse than the internal one. Why? Because it comes from the teachers and parents. Teachers obviously want you to have good grades, at least usually. However, the problem is that they think that their subject is the most important one of them all, and that you should focus basically entirely on it. But even despite that, they don't generate the same amount of pressure as parents. Parents will, again, usually want you to have good grades. So they will pressure you to constantly study. And they might not understand that you simply don't understand the subject on a conceptual level, or that we simply don't want to spend our entire day studying. But there is also another thing that should explain why teenagers, for example, hate school. So this point will be kind of different, because it won't be about school system failure. And it's the fact that people, especially teenagers, don't like being told what to do, which, as you can imagine, is a quite problematic thing, because how do you make them study without them rebelling? And I think this is the crux of the issue, the mindset. Because while aforementioned system failures are bad, the mindset doesn't help. Because let's be honest here for a second, if the changes that I mentioned went into effect, would teenagers and students in general like school? Would they? Would they? No, they wouldn't. Complaining would come back basically instantly after changes were made, because the core issue of hating on authority wouldn't change. The amount of people that hate school would decrease, that's true, but it would never reach zero. And I say all of that as a high school student myself. Even if I see that something gets changed for the better, people are still complaining about having to do anything that isn't just scrolling on their phones. Are we just lazy? Yes. Yes, we are. This is not even that debatable. In my experience, a lot of people don't even try. They just hate on school because that's a popular thing to do. They then don't really have any particular reason. The reasons I mentioned before are definitely a large factor, but hating on school just for the sake of doing it is a larger thing than most people will realize. However, a lot of it probably comes from a pretty big misunderstanding. You see, there is this thing where people say that school doesn't teach them anything useful, like fixing stuff, paying taxes, finding misinformation. And there are multiple problems with that approach. For starters, it should be the parents' job to teach that stuff, but anyway. And if you can't change a light bulb, you have bigger problems than school curriculum. School's job is to teach you stuff that you wouldn't learn as a basic life skill. While researching this video, I came across someone complaining that school is useless because they had to use the internet to see how to fix something. And that's stupid for multiple reasons, but the main one is that school won't prepare you for everything. it's not its job. There are simply way too many variables to consider. And also, a lot of that stuff is taught at school. Taxes, for example, can easily be put into math and, for example, English or whatever your native language is. Understanding that is, for a regular person, not really that hard. So, for starters, school times are the first issue that needs to be fixed. Then the amount of material. But students still would hate it no matter what change was made. But this shouldn't matter, because even if students still hated it, they would at least be smarter, and that's the end goal. But what do you think about it? Leave your thoughts in the comments. So if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing, and see ya next time. Bye!